The story of the evolution of the Earth and all the life that it harbors is a beautiful one, but a long one. To help us understand this long story, we will use the terrestrial timeline, which puts the 13.8 billion year long history of the universe, and the Earth along with it, into a scale that we can understand. One yearly calendar. January 1st marks the Big Bang, or the sudden creation of the universe. Debris floats through the expanse of space. Stars are born from nebulae and niches within the fabric of space. The history of the universe is being written. Our story begins in one corner of the universe, where the cloud of debris that is about to become our solar system starts to spiral inwards. On March 15th, the force of gravity causes all the debris and floating space particles to come together and form the Sun and all its daughter planets, forming about 4.6 billion years ago, on August 31st. The creation of our planet, the Earth, is fiery and chaotic. Over time, a small ball of mass began to form in orbit of the Earth, only 24,000 kilometers away from the Earth. At this distance, it would have been a looming and disastrous entity that would later become to be known as the Moon. However, several billion years later, the Moon distances itself from the Earth, a mere souvenir of the chaotic beginnings of the Earth. If you look up in the night sky, you'll see that the Moon today is 385,000 kilometers away, 16 times farther than it once was. A while after its creation, the Earth starts to develop a thin, cooling outer crust around the flaming plasma that lies deep in the center of the Earth. The outer crust is rather thin, and with a lot of crevices and cracks where magma from the crust escapes and becomes lava on the surface. There is no atmosphere. There is only a magnetic field protecting the Earth from solar wind and nature's weapons. A day-night cycle is formed, where generally nights are colder and days are hotter. Seasons become evident. When the Earth is farther from the Sun, it is colder, and when it is closer, it is warmer. The climate is still much warmer than it would be today, because the Earth is only just recovering from its era of heat, explosions, and plasma. The Sun, young in its years, shines slightly less than it would today. These factors together combine to create the beginnings of a primitive climate. Fast forward a few million years, and all the gas released from the volcanoes cause a primitive atmosphere to fully emerge. At this time, the atmosphere is made up of sulfur dioxide, dihydrogen monosulfide, ammonia, nitrogen, and even water vapor from the comets flying near the Earth. This causes primitive weather, composed of precipitation, wind, tornadoes, floods, blizzards, fog, and hurricanes. This leads to primitive climate, volcanism, asteroids, and comets. The Earth is constantly influenced by the solar cycle, specifically sunspots. Weather is formed by the Sun. On September 21st, life on Earth begins to emerge. One theory of how life originated on our planet is based on the Miller-Urey experiment, and this theory says how life, under the right conditions, can originate from non-living atomic atoms and molecules. It talks about molecules such as carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, and water vapor, which makes up the primitive atmosphere. These molecules react and form amino acids, sugars, and lipids, which are the key to opening the door of life. Lipids are molecules that include fats, waxes, fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, and many more. Their main functions are storing energy, signaling, and they are part of the cell membrane. But before we dive into the wide expanse of primitive life forms, let's ask ourselves one question. What is life? In order to be considered life, an organism must conform to a set of characteristics. Living things contain one or more cells, use energy and produce waste, grow, respond to changes in the environment, reproduce, and finally will all eventually die. All living things must have all these characteristics, else it isn't a living thing. The Earth's primordial cells developed in the allowing areas on its surface, but it's a case of survival of the fittest. Only the quickest to adapt survive. The rest died. The ones that survive live in crevices slightly beneath the upper layer of the crust, where there is just enough sunlight for life to develop, but not enough dangers for death to be as close at hand. Eventually, the cells that are left over begin to evolve. The first specialized cells are created, forming amoebas, a type of single-celled organisms. They develop the ability to move, allowing them to find food and escape from the dangers of the chaotic and primitive Earth. On September 21st, 3.6 billion years ago, life begins with the development of the early prokaryotes. A prokaryote is a single-celled organism that lacks a membrane-bound nucleus, mitochondria, or any other membrane-bound organelles. This is an example of early cell life on Earth. Suddenly, a process of events begin to unfold, changing the course of history. The Great Oxygenation Event, which is not really an event, but more of a process, occurred 2.3 billion years ago, on October 29th of our cosmic calendar. Although the appearance of dioxygen in the atmosphere, O2, opened up a portal for millions of other species to develop on the Earth, it also destroyed nearly all of the Earth's obligate anaerobes, which are microorganisms that are killed by normal concentrations of oxygen. Even before this event, oxygen was being created by cyanobacteria through photosynthesis. However, any free oxygen was being immediately captured and decomposed by dissolved iron and organic matter. Eventually, these oxygen sinks began to fill up and could no longer hold all the oxygen produced by cyanobacteria. This free oxygen accumulated in the atmosphere, caused the Great Oxygenation. Aerobic organisms begin to evolve. On November 9th on our calendar, 2 billion years ago, the first eukaryotic cell is born, a hugely evolved form of the prokaryote, with an internal structure and usually containing its own DNA. Eukaryotes make up the cells of fungi, plants, and animals. It's already the beginning of November, and the cells that make up fungi haven't even formed yet. Soon eukaryotes which could sexually reproduce are formed. All animals, humans, everything that can sexually reproduce today, all evolved from one group of ancestors, single-celled eukaryotes. At this point in time, over 80% into the year, we are still only at single-celled organisms. The written textbook history of life that we know today is yet to take place. Fast forward 1 billion years later, and our single-celled organisms begin to evolve. Over time, when new and new environments are coming to be and climate and weather are drastically changing, the cells begin to adapt. On December 5th, multicellular life originated which have their own specialized cells that have their key functions, having the ability to survive and adapt under different conditions and circumstances, such as underwater, in air, in hot or cold, etc. They simply are organisms that have more than one cell. Multicellular life has evolved more than 46 times and makes up almost every living thing that exists today. From animals to plants and even to humans, we are all multicellular. On December 14th, about 670 million years ago, animals originated from their first multicellular organism, and this led to it evolving in order to adapt to its environment. They made up the kingdom Animalia, which is the second biggest kingdom, losing to plants. The name animals comes from Latin, meaning having breath. Bilaterians represent an interesting change in the bodies of simple animals. Bilaterians are a type of water creature that have bilateral symmetry. This means that they have an upside and a downside, a front end and a back end, and also a left and a right side, all of which they are aware of. However, it is important to note that in biology, symmetry is approximate. It simply hints at several patterns in the placement of similar body organs and parts. On December 14th, arthropods, which were the ancestors of arachnids and insects, originated as well. Then on December 17th, 3 days later, about 500 million years ago, fish and proto-amphibians started to emerge. Fish are a common Animalia kingdom subgroup, or genus, which consists of animals that have gills to breathe and live underwater. Fish are vertebrates, which means that they have spines. Over time, fish have evolved to be more streamlined, allowing them to travel faster through the water, their home environment, by cutting through it, thereby reducing drag. A fish's gills look very much like the underside of a mushroom. They are feathery in nature and absorb the oxygen from the water to use in the fish's bloodstream. Finally, fish are cold-blooded. This is a term that refers to the fact that fish's internal body systems are unregulated and automatically take the temperature of their environment. On December 20th, about 450 million years ago, land plants were created. The evolution of plants has resulted in widely varying levels of complexity and cell type. Each plant adapted to its own unique environment at its own pace. Each unique plant had to adapt in order to survive in a world where competition can be the difference between life and death. On December 21st, about 400 million years ago, insects and seeds were formed as well. The evolution of insects dates back to the Devonian period. Insects and seeds. Seeds had to adapt just as well as plants if they wanted to survive in an ever-changing, evolving earth. Flowers were part of this too, in that they had to find ways to protect themselves like the rose we know today. Insects on early Earth were very different than today. Some, however, still exist today, for example, the dragonfly. On December 22nd, about 360 million years ago, amphibians emerged. The development of amphibians, of animal class Amphibia, were due to necessary evolutionary adaptations. Early fish began to develop leg-like fins in order to crawl along the bottom of their water habitats. They also began to adapt to breathe oxygen because the lack of oxygen in the Devonian period swamps was unable to support them. Eventually, amphibians were created as a result of these adaptations. The name amphibian comes from the Greek amphibios, which literally translates to boat lives. Amphibians are typically gill-breathing when young and then mature into a lung-breathing adult stage. Some prehistoric amphibians are On December 23rd, about 300 million years ago, reptiles were created. Reptiles were earliest present during the Carboniferous period and evolved from reptile-like amphibians that were becoming more and more accustomed to life on land and were adapting to be much different than normal amphibians. Some of the main reptiles today are crocodiles, turtles, lizards, and snakes, and they are all cold-blooded, air-breathing vertebrates. Reptiles are one of the main classifications of animals that make up our world today, and in our calendar only showed up about a week ago. Around the same time, 231.4 million years ago, dinosaurs rose to dominate the Earth. They inhabited the planet for a long time. Many dinosaurs had to evolve in order to adapt to their constantly changing climate. An example of this would be the Predasaurs and Novanian dinosaurs in the Cretaceous-Paleogene era. They went extinct about 66 million years ago, and they evolved due to the change of climate at that certain time. Constant volcanic activity and eruptions through immense amounts of sulfur and other deadly gases up into our atmosphere caused a cloud of smoke to form. And this cloud of smoke blocked out the sun's rays, causing Earth's temperature to drop rapidly and stay there. Photosynthesis was not possible. Plants died, primary consumers died, and secondary consumers died, eventually wiping out all life on Earth. This period on Earth was known as the Ice Age, and so starts a new era on Earth. The Ice Age lasted for about 10,000 years, and slowly life started to emerge again. The mammals were one of these first animals. On December 26th, about 200 million years ago, mammals emerged. Animals in the class Mammalia are quite different than reptiles and birds, in that their brain controls their body temperature and their circulatory system, which includes the heart. The mammalian brain has a special part called the neocortex, and this distinguishes them from reptiles and other creatures. In humans, the neocortex controls our motor function and all our other senses. Mammals first evolved from therapsids, which were mammal-like reptiles. Once the dinosaurs went extinct, mammals finally evolved into mouse-like creatures, and then evolved into the wild variety of species that exist today. On December 27th, about 150 million years ago, birds came to be. Birds originated from the theropod dinosaurs, a group of dinosaurs with a similar bone-like structure as birds. Birds share many skeletal features with dinosaurs, and it is in the 1800s where scientists found evidence of a primitive bird in Germany called Archaeopteryx. Many fossils of dinosaurs were collected with preserved feathers. To summarize, the early ancestors of birds have been proven to be indeed dinosaurs. On December 28th, about 130 million years ago, flowers started to grow up again, and soon primitive primates developed. Primates are a group of mammals that contain all lemurs, monkeys, and apes, including humans. The word primates comes from Latin prime, which literally means prime, first rank. They originated from animals that lived in trees of tropical forests. Primates are a very good example of animals evolving to meet the conditions of their complex environments, which involved swinging in space from tree to tree. On New Year's Eve at 2:24 p.m., about 12.3 million years ago, great apes, Homindae, were born. The Homindae are the species of great apes that have been present for the last couple of days on our terrestrial timeline. Humans actually fall under Homindae, along with orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos. The animals in this family share 97% of the human genome, and as such are our closest cousins. On December 31st at 10:24, primitive humans appeared. This included all the different animals in the genus Homo, with the well-known being Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, also known as modern man, is the name of the human race. We originated from Neanderthals, also as the cavemen. So the sapiens part is because that is the only species of Homo remaining on the planet. Us modern humans are the subspecies sapiens. We originated from the genus Pan, and this is where chimpanzees and humans become separate species. About 400,000 years ago, on December 31st at 11:44 p.m., primitive humans discover fire. At 11:52, about 200,000 years ago, the human species as we know it emerges. On December 31st at 11:55, about 5,000 years ago, the beginning of most recent glacial periods take place. And at 11:58, about 35,000 years ago, sculpture and painting is discovered. With 28 seconds to spare, about 12,000 years ago, agriculture is discovered. All our known history, everything from writing to the creation of the computer we wrote the script on, took place in the last 13 seconds of the terrestrial timeline. The next time you find yourself wasting away time on modern technology, which by the way was created in the last second, remember the 13.8 billion years of events that took place in just the right combination to bring you life among the trillions of other life forms on the planet. And then maybe reconsider how you really want to spend your precious 80 or so years on this planet.